Hey everybody, welcome to Missing Links with John, Brock, and myself, Stephen King, where we discuss what's missing in Web3 architecture. This week, we are going to talk about IPFS and what is missing with IPFS, what it is, a little bit about how data is stored on Web 2, and the transition into Web 3. For feedback, please go to missinglinks.fm, send us an email, give us some feedback on what we discuss and what you'd like us to cover next week. All right, let's get into it. So how you guys doing today?
Doing good. Yeah.
Brachiosaurus just got back from NFT NYC, where I sent him the video of the protesters. What did you see them protesting?
No, I think that was actually was staged. I'm pretty sure.
All right.
It had to be.
Yeah.
NFTs are a little bit cooler now since they did that. So I'll tell you this. So what I did read about it was the ticketing was a little weird. It wasn't. I mean, what they should have done is they should have had an NFT as the entry ticket, and apparently they didn't do that, and so it was kind of there was also no levels of security.
Like the first day, I didn't even pick up my badge because I didn't need it. No one was checking. You just like walking around.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's crazy. How was New York City? Is it much different than it used to be, or is it getting back to quote unquote normal?
I haven't been in years, like since before the pandemic anyway, so I didn't have a ton to compare it to. But it seemed open, like tons of people out. Like I don't know, it didn't seem weird or off.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So let's jump into it. So, some of the questions that I wanted to cover today is data storage, and this was an education for me at first with blockchain, because it wasn't apparent to me that you couldn't put copious amounts of data on this on the infrastructure like you can in Web 2. The database structure is a little bit different. So I thought we'd start with how is Web 2 data stored versus Web 3, and then we can kind of jump into IPFS.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, at kind of an abstract level, it's stored almost the same. I think the big difference is in Web 2, it's really cheap to have your own database, and Web 3, it's a shared database. So you have to like compete with everybody else.
Well, take me through the levels of that, right? So I remember in the late 90s, it was actually normal to set up your own server. And you guys are definitely way too young for that. I didn't do this. I was pretty young too. I don't even know, John. You might not. Who's younger? You are. It doesn't matter. You guys were born in like 2000.
I think 2000. Oh, wow. Okay.
I like to play with Brock because he's like 25 years old.
He doesn't believe that we're in the same generation.
Well, so we're 90s babies, both Brock and I.
All right. 90s. Well, so then you guys were on the earth. So just walk me through servers to today.
I mean, today you're just paying to use somebody else's servers. Yeah.
Right, but why is that? Why did we start basically hosting our own emails and our own infrastructure, and then we moved to cloud? And then why aren't we using cloud in Web 3? Why is it gotten more complex with IPFS and then, the token that they introduced, and just everything that we've had to deal with in terms of building?
So I would say, at least from like Web 1 to Web 2, like the idea of on-prem to cloud and all that was that just times evolved. The idea was that if you manage it, then I think it goes deeper than just the idea that technology changed. It was how the modern business ran. Like you had these huge companies that had all this space and all this, they had brick and mortar. They had their brick and mortar. They had their distribution. They had everything in house. So it made sense to keep everything in house. And then I think with a combination of, just the expenses of running that in house, along with other, you could think about geopolitics with manufacturing and just the demand needed to actually maintain that, a lot of these businesses couldn't solve it. Plus, I think even before, and Stephen, this I'd love to hear your comment on this. Even before the '08 crash, I think a lot of businesses were trying to get out of owning real estate, especially in the tech sector, because it just didn't make sense. So I think it was a perfect transition from Web 1 to Web 2, in my opinion. And then Web 2 to Web 3 we can discuss after, Brock's thoughts on that.
Well, so I'm just curious, honestly, it was a cost issue or it was a security issue or
I
it was just an efficiency issue
A
where,
little of both.
okay,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's all cost based. Like you could spend the money to make on-premise secure, but it's an overhead thing. And so as it becomes standardized and you can put that off on somebody else, then you can focus on just what makes your business unique.
right. Okay.
Hmm.
It's funny because
Yeah.
I don't think things are going to go back to that, but I would actually prefer to run my own infrastructure. And I'm sure you guys would too, to some extent. And I guess we will.
But we're nerds. There's a difference. We're nerds. And we enjoy the stress of dealing with it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, so that's Web 1 to Web 2, Web 2 to Web 3. So now we're setting up an EC2 instance or whatever it may be to run our website or to run a database. And now we're going into, or we're transitioning into blockchain. So why can't we put the same amount of data or large amounts of data onto something like the Ethereum blockchain? For instance, the MLS that we were building, we couldn't put all of those listings on the Ethereum blockchain. And I know cost was one consideration, but there were many more. So, what is this transition, and how does that lead us into IPFS?
Yeah, I mean it's I think it just goes back to the shared thing. So
Hmm.
with Ethereum, anytime any data is added, every single Ethereum node has to sync that same data. So you have
Yeah.
to incentivize the entire network to store your data, which becomes cost prohibitive at any sort of like large scale.
And I think that is the same reason, not to jump ahead, IPFS has some flaws now where if the gateway doesn't have what you're looking for, it has to go find it and kind of pull it in. So it kind of goes back to that same problem that if you want really good performance against the on the network, all these different gateways have to have what you're looking for. And that's great and all, but coming from kind of if we're thinking about it from a tech, like again a price component, and not even a price component, like more of a, I don't even want to go environmental just yet, but if you have a hard drive, one hard drive worth of data, and it's just movies or whatever, and you want it to be part of this ecosystem, you have to have like six of those represented somewhere else around the world. So it's good to have redundancies, but again, the question becomes what's too much of a redundancy. And I think that goes back to kind of one of the problems of IPS, in my opinion, of why I've had issues with it.
So again, it's efficiency, right? So the blockchain is great
Yep.
for decentralizing a global state of transactions, moving money pretty much across
Hmm.
borders really cheap and efficiently. But if you want to put not only, Steven sent $100 to John, but if you wanted to send with that transaction Steven's resume or some amount of information that's in addition to just that initial transaction, the capacity of the blockchain isn't designed for that additional
Mm-mm.
data. And so we've got to pin that somewhere else. And it makes
Yep.
sense if we're decentralizing, we're basically taking these transactions and making them borderless, that we should do the same with data. So Juan, I think is it Juan Bennett? He comes up with the interplanetary file system, and he says, "Look, we can do something similar, but with information, and it doesn't have to be reliant on a specific blockchain or blockchain in general." So let's just start there. I mean, explain to me, like I'm five, what the heck is IPFS?
It's a peer-to-peer protocol for sharing. Like it's a standard way to share files. So if your computer is running IPFS and my computer is running IPFS, then your computer can ask my computer for data. That's
Hmm.
essentially what it is.
Okay, so do you guys envision that IPFS will basically be sort of this larger decentralized database with independent, uh, let's say, node communities running on them? And what I mean by that is, again, I know I go
Like
back to real estate a lot, but
factions.
it's because we worked on. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, so like with if you're gonna have a bunch of if you're gonna take every MLS, multiple listing service, which is hosting all the real estate information for residential real estate here in the United States, if you were going to transition that into this Web3 ecosystem, would you want to incentivize people to run nodes, create, basically stand up your own IPFS nodes for this particular use case, and then have people within the use case, within that community, host these nodes? Or would you just want to leverage the overall IPFS community, or does it not even matter?
Yeah, I think
I mean,
it depends
if there's no right
on.
answer, just how would you design it then? I mean, it doesn't have to be right or
Yeah,
wrong.
well,
Yeah.
I
Well, let's
think
let
that
Brock
is the
go.
answer.
Think
Is that
about, go to Spree, right? Talk. How would you? How
yeah.
would you? Well, if you were going to pay, that's a little bit more of a centralized model, right? But actually, no, it's not. That data you're pulling from the blockchain. But imagine if you wanted to pin additional information into that database that wasn't on chain, right? So, whatever that may be, right? So the premise for
It's
Spree.
the
Go ahead.
question becomes. Well, I think the question becomes in the business model for the company you're working at, or the project you're working on. Do you want to be a gatekeeper for the data, or do you want it like publicly available? Like most companies are
Yeah.
totally fine, or even like make money by being the gatekeeper to that data, and so they want it centralized. But then you have somebody like a Wikipedia who wants to like get it out in the world. Um, so then they're incentivized to spread that in any way possible.
But isn't there
Hmm.
an efficiency consideration to that too? Let's say that I'm on YouTube right now and it's in this decentralized model, and I want to watch a video of cats playing with yarn or whatever it is. And so right now I've got you guys know how I feel about Slack. I and Spotify. I mean, to ping those servers. So just for everyone that I live out sort of in the boonies right outside Telluride, Colorado, and don't get great service. And so for whatever reason, for me to access those two applications is next to impossible. I can usually access anything else, but it's something to do with retrieving the information from those servers. And I know that I cache some of that data on my phone or my computer, but not nearly enough. And so if I was going to watch this YouTube video in the same type of use case, wouldn't it make more sense that if, Brock, you live next door and you watch that exact same video, that I can grab it from you or grab pieces from people that are around sort of this neighborhood rather than jump all the way to you know Google server or Slack server? Or am I totally off base and thinking about this the wrong way?
As long as you're not the first one to load the video, it is likely going to be better for you just
Yeah.
because the content is now nearer. And so that is the idea of
Uh-huh.
this like global network. But whoever has to load it first, it's generally not going to be better.
Well, it could be so that whoever is loading it first. I mean, that means not if you upload a video on YouTube that's an hour long in high def. I mean, that's not fun. That takes hours. So it's the same type of deal, right?
The
Um,
difference is like your neighbor's not incentivized to share that data with you in an efficient manner.
But could you incentivize
They
them?
they might. That's what Filecoin tries to do. Yes.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
cool. Go. What? So what does Filecoin want to do?
So IPFS has a couple, I don't know, a couple qualms that people have with IPFS. So there's the data. Uh, is not permanent, in that like a given IPFS node will only hold on to the data that it wants. So it's like you have to like request it, right? And so Filecoin tries to use the same like protocol as IPFS, but incentivize, like provide a marketplace for people adding content to force the permanence of that permanence for storing that content. Yeah. So like I can pay you, Steven, to store content for me using the Filecoin protocol.
And what guarantees do I have that that's not going to get overwritten?
It's like baked into the network. So like by me paying you, which is really paying your node is now like contractually required to store that data. It's like leasing hard drive space.
So let me ask you about this analogy. If and you guys tell me if I'm thinking about this the right way. So let's say that there is a video that I want to pay you guys to host on IPFS for me, and I don't want it to go away, right? So it's not just you guys though. Am I basically taking this video and envision that it's a glass jar and I smash it on the ground and it's in millions of shards and I send it to the IPFS network, the different nodes. Do I have to call out those other nodes that I'm sending this sharded glass to, or and then obviously I'm reconfiguring the glass when I want to call it back and watch the video? Or am I specifically calling out, hey, I want to send it to John, I want to send it to Brock, I'm going to pay you guys specifically? And is that Filecoin? Is that sort of a way to think about it? Or is the protocol more random?
I think it's more random. You're kind of more paying the network, but IPFS without Filecoin, it's a pull, not a push. So you don't get to like those last shards. You don't get to like throw them out onto the network. You just trying to have them sitting for other IPFS nodes to fetch if they want them.
And how do they find that data?
Yeah. If it's requested, and depending on, I think it is depending. Brock, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking depending on frequency, it will cache it at certain points. You have to eventually, as Brock says, you have to pull it through. There's no incentive for someone to pull it through.
Except for them wanting that data. Yeah.
Yeah.
So by pulling it through, first of all, they got to go find that data. Is there a pool where they can go find that data?
Yeah.
No, I'm asking.
That's the IPFS network. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the network effect.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So but then if I'm the node operator, then I actually get to see that data, or I'm just hosting encrypted information that I have no idea what it is.
Potentially both. Like you're gonna see what's shared, like what's on IPFS. That might be encrypted, but the encryption key then wouldn't be on IPFS, so you'd have to like get that from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that, right? Remember when we had this issue? You guys were like, "Hey, we're going to put all these people's information online in IPFS that is going to be public. Anybody can get it." So walk me through that. How did we do that? So basically, just for the people that might be listening to this, so we had a bunch of real estate information that we were going to put on IPFS. And the guys told me, hey, just so you know, everybody in the world is going to be able to see this if they want to. And we were like, well, we can't do that because we don't have permission we had like tens of thousands of listings. And so you guys suggested that we encrypt the data. And so walk me through that. How did we do that?
Broken up. Yeah, so if I remember correctly, how we did it was we kept a key that was centralized, and then we broke up the payloads into chunks, and then pretty much when we needed to update it or do some degree of I don't know, delivery, it was rebuilt pretty much. Is that's how I remember?
Yeah, where did we store the key? Were we centralizing that? Yeah, we were, right? We held the key, and then it was a matter of okay, and then the end user would come to the site, and then that's where basically it was I think we stored it in the user interface, right?
I thought it was in a contract.
Was it?
We wanted to do a
Was it?
contract. We never got there. I think we just had it in like a centralized database. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we mapped that out. Brock, I remember you walking me through how we could technically do that, and you can get as technical as you want, but how do you remember how we were going to do that?
Yeah. So the idea was that you'd have a essentially a contract on Ethereum, whatever it might be. Um, and in that contract, it's cheap enough theoretically to store an encryption key because it's just a string.
Mhm.
So it wouldn't be like more expensive than storing like a wallet address, for instance. So to put that in the contract, you add some gatekeeping mechanism to the contract, and then uh, you can use that same key then to encrypt the data, encrypt and decrypt the data before and after you put it on IPFS.
Yeah, that's how I remember it.
How do you
Yeah,
decrypt it? Like what's the auth? You have to
just
be
depends on your.
authorized.
Oh, so depending on who, yeah, so depending on the person, so theoretically, if you had a smart contract, you would have a modifier where the owner of the data and or the party that's authorized could pull the key and then pretty much listen to the streams from IPFS or I forgot what we were using for that, OrbitDB. Yeah, OrbitDB streams and the logs. And those you would get that would give you enough data. I think it was a null check, Brock, where if it would attempt to decrypt it and if it failed, then it's like, you don't have access or we won't digest it, and if it passed, um, then yeah, apparently you have access to it. And I think that was kind of the big idea with the indexer for Imbrex along the lines of how MLSs could disseminate data in a decentralized way.
Do you guys know of any projects, or are people starting to do this? Because we were way too early building all this. In fact, we built every product
Yeah.
that we should have actually built instead of an MLS. Trying to bring together the institutions was, I think it still is too early for some of that stuff. But I think that everything, between ETOS and or automating transactions so that people didn't have to deal with private keys and things like that. I've been looking around for other projects, other use cases, and I've steered clear of the NFT community. So Brock, maybe there's something there going on that I don't know about. But do you guys see any of this stuff going on yet?
It's chatter. I couldn't name a
Yeah.
project offhand, but it's definitely like a known concept. Um,
Okay.
Yeah. I think everyone knows it's a problem. Everyone knows there's chatter about it. I don't think there's anyone, I don't want to say ballsy enough, but I don't think anyone has taken the time to really sit down and like go in and try to solve the problem. Because
I would
there's as
I
we've
would even
mentioned,
say there are people who have claimed to have solved it, but maybe the market hasn't
yeah,
agreed with them. Um,
yeah,
like
that's
two industries
fair.
that come to mind are healthcare. So there's companies like trying to
Hmm.
do health records on chain. Makes a ton of sense, and so you encrypt them and have like the end patient be in control of their own health records. That would be
Or authorized doctor.
right.
Yeah.
And then the other is like the music industry. So if you can figure out how to like have your music stream encrypted, and in order to decrypt it, you have to like pay a royalty. If you can figure that
Hmm.
out, that's a whole huge unlock as well.
Well,
I
John,
think the
I try.
biggest issues,
Go ahead.
yeah, the biggest issue with encrypted streaming, I don't think our technology is powerful enough to do concurrent encrypted streamings. I think that's just a huge lift in my opinion. But Stephen, you were saying something.
Well, no. So why is that a huge lift? That's not a bandwidth issue. What is the? Why do you say that?
I do. I personally think it's a bandwidth issue because um, looking at the amount of information that is currently being broadcasted across the world and how much just the global internet infrastructure is going to be built out over the next 10 years, I think we're behind what the demand is calling for. When you think about how many people, especially overseas, India, parts of Africa, will be going online and be taking away from the global bandwidth, if you want to call it. So I think that is my own take on it, and that's why I think trying to solve that problem will be a relatively big problem. Plus, as we've experienced with our own projects, just user experience, and especially when it comes to streaming latency, I feel like these will, to my understanding, I feel like some of these things have not been thought through 100%, in my opinion. And I feel that I don't even want to say I feel. I think that what will happen is that there's going to be a lot of stuff that's over engineered, but it's not going to be used um, effectively or at the appropriate scale for it to actually scale, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to take a lot to get.
Plus, ISPs. Think about ISPs. ISPs, if you think about, let's not even think about the technical component here. Let's think about the regulatory component. ISPs are on the hook for certain content that's streamed or put across their network. And they have no incentive of data going through their network being fully encrypted, or um, they need control, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are answering subpoenas and stuff for taking things offline that are either copyright striked or illegal in nature. So I think that's the biggest issue with that. What Brock said there, but
Well, so
in
that's
my
that's
opinion.
already an issue with IPFS, and you guys were explaining a little bit about this already. But people, are uploading all sorts of crazy stuff, and this is like you could see this a mile away. That eventually, look, if this technology is basically anything you upload is going to be out there in perpetuity, more or less, then people are going to do some crazy things
Hmm.
and upload some things that they shouldn't. And I know there's a lot of people that are working on that problem. That's a big problem to solve. But anyway, I'll maybe that'll be a topic for next week. Because I do think I agree with you. I agree with you on many fronts, but we won't go down that path right now. So another question I had for you though was about IPNS. So the name it's IPNS is the acronym for name service, right, Brock?
For
I
IPFS,
think
yeah,
so.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this whole thing about pinning data onto
Yep. Name
IPFS
system. Name system. That's what it
name
is. Yep.
system.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. So
Yep.
let's walk down that road a little bit because we actually used another company like Fiesta or something, and I don't know if they're still around, but they were pinning IPFS data. It was sort of like a
Pinata.
marketplace. Pinata, right? I wonder if they're still around.
Yep.
Yep.
So
They're
what
everywhere
is
and they're deep in the NFT space.
well, God bless them. I so what
Yeah.
what is IPNS? What's the objective? What does it do?
So IPFS, the way it works is it's content addressing. So given file, image, whatever it might be, when you add it to the IPFS protocol, you get back a content hash. And so it's like a verifiable deterministic hash based on the content you just added. Which means that if, say, it's I don't know, a Word document that you're editing over and over again, every time you edit it, you're going to get a different hash. So if you want to like share it with somebody, or you want it to be your like personal website, for instance, you would have to change the link every single time you make a change to the content. So IPNS attempts to solve this by letting you have a naming system. So it can be uh, like my node's IPFS hash. So your node will have a hash / blog. And that blog can then dynamically point to the latest IPFS hash of your blog content. And so that can be changing without having to change the actual link that you would access the content from.
So it's sort of
Yeah.
like Google Docs, right? So
And
let's
that's a
say
big
we've got a
issue with like.
I was just thinking in terms of like, let's say the three of us have access to a Google Doc and we make comments and on Google server, obviously it's under one file. Is that sort of the idea that you just keep the existing hash, but then you can make all these different changes, sort of like the comment section, but you can pin it all to that one master hash, I guess you could say.
For Google sense, I think it's more that everything that is done is an event, and then that event is rendered on the document. I don't know 100%, but I believe it's more of an event based thing. I don't think they. I don't know. Would that even make sense?
I was just say I always like the website analogy because I don't know. I think everybody should be doing it and nobody is. Um, but to like in like a standard website, you're gonna end up with like an index.html file and a bunch of like compiled JavaScript files and images and whatever it might be. And so every single time that you make a change to any one of those files, you're gonna get a new IPFS hash. It would be virtually like practically impossible to change the link that you give everybody to your website every single time you make an update to it. So using IPNS, you can still say, okay, this is the permanent link, but I'm still going to update my website from time to time.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Um, so then one of my last questions for you guys is what is going on with IPFS? Why I know there's some projects that are using it. Dune Analytics, I believe, is using it, and a few others. Um, why isn't it scaling? I would think by now, I mean, we've been working in this sector since, playing around in it since I don't know when you guys got into it, but we started building actual projects in like 2016. IPFS was definitely around. Then it might have just have launched. Maybe it was early 2017. But that's basically how we came up with the Rex indexer. And it doesn't seem like anything has changed other than Filecoin is now a thing. And what do you guys see on the infrastructure end? Are people using it? Is it starting to scale? I mean, there's no alternative that I've seen. Have you guys seen any other projects? you know, Feel free to answer any of the following because these are questions that I constantly am looking to seek and I haven't found yet.
I I've not seen any projects that are promising. I've seen a couple of really, I don't want to say poorly designed, but some really interesting and messy thoughts around how to smart cache. The idea that the network itself would look at. Oh, it took the idea of that. Um, we know we can track IP addresses. We could track a whole bunch of metadata about a certain type of content or a certain type of transaction on a network without actually knowing what it is. So could you potentially use all that data to determine how to smartly cache and move things around? Almost kind of like I don't even know if like how AWS edges kind of determine what needs to be moved where when it needs to. But it's a very loosely thought out concept I saw on Reddit.
The the one alternative that comes to mind is Arweave or Arweave. I'm not actually sure what the right name is. But it's like a whole blockchain infrastructure specifically for permanent file storage. So it's can solve similar use cases that IPFS can and Filecoin, but their whole focus is on permanence. And so I've seen adoption on Arweave specifically in like the NFT community to actually make like the NFT images permanent. Um, Lots of other like projects in the NFT space will use IPFS for their images, but I've like frequently seen that if the project is no longer funded or well maintained, then those IPFS hashes and the images behind them just kind of disappear. So you're now owning an NFT that points to nothing.
Well, that's what, this is one of the things that I didn't like NFTs at first, but maybe this changed. But it was basically, wasn't it just an IPFS hash that pointed to a JPEG? And the JPEG was essentially, it would point to like a flower that was a JPEG image that was hosted on AWS or something. But the
Mm-hmm.
IPFS hash was there. Great. Okay. But, the whole point is if AWS goes down, you're not going to have access to your $1 million NFT.
Yeah, I mean
Is that true?
it's
Is that real?
true-ish. Yeah, the idea behind NFTs, like broadly, is the NFT is the proof of ownership, so it's not the object itself. And so, like
Mm-hmm.
decentralizing the object is a whole other like problem space, but people often like lump them together.
Well, I'm lumping them together because I think they should be lumped together. I can't do anything with an IPFS hash if my $1 million flower image is hosted on AWS, and AWS goes down from some Russian attack. I mean, unless Brock, you're gonna buy my
Yeah.
IPFS hash.
Be buying the ownership
Yeah.
of that IPFS hash. Yeah.
IPFS hash. Yeah, it's about ownership. It's not. I think at the end of the day, it's not really about the content. It's just the ownership. Because people are doing it with like physical things, like a house. Like you're not going to digitize your house unless you really. Though that would be cool. You take a 3D mapping of the house and put that and link that to an NFT. It's like a versioning of a house. You own this version of the house.
It's metaverse.
Well, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, but you could basically put your I mean, you could do that actually, and you could literally when you build a house, you could put instead of like they do established 1995 or whenever it was built, right? You could definitely physically link. I think you could more easily do that with a physical object than a digital object right now.
Yeah. I think it's easier to do it with a physical object because you don't have to deal with storage.
Yeah. All right.
Plus,
Well,
so how do you destroy it then at the end of the day? Like what happens if you need to knock it down? Does it become like so Brock, you might know more about this, but can you like kind of like in some of the ERC-20 and older tokens, you could change parameters of the contract? If
Yeah.
you're the owner of the NFT and you change certain things, can you change certain things within the NFT and then resell it? Almost like you're flipping the NFT.
Not as like an individual owner, but if you own the contract, there's one big use case that everybody goes with, where they'll mint out all NFTs, but they're unrevealed, so nobody knows what they look like yet. And then there's a parameter in the contract that you can change, which
Hmm.
basically says like, all right, now point all the NFTs to this new URL or IPFS hash, and then that's when like all the images are revealed. So you can do stuff like that,
Interesting.
and it kind of like adds some ability to like have dynamic NFTs, and there's some I don't know some cool things going on there, but not at like the
Almost like a
individual
seasonal
NFT.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, almost like a seasonal thing. I could see how in gaming, if you own a certain type of like gun or something in like Fortnite or something, like you can rotate crafts or images while retaining the same item.
well, like Neopets is getting into like blockchain NFT gaming, so it's like you can like grow
Oh
your
wow,
pet and like
I
give
haven't
it
heard that.
food. Yeah.
I didn't know those things still existed.
Apparently.
I think gaming makes the most sense, right? Because so my son, he's 11 years old, and he is into gaming way more than I ever was, and it's and his cousin, my sister's son, is even more. He's 8, and he lives in Roblox and all that. And actually, for NFTs, that actually makes a lot of sense. I know I've heard there's a lot of complexities though, because what's the incentive, right? If I want to go from one game to another for the other game developer to participate in that,
Hmm.
because the economics don't necessarily make sense for that other game developer. And so I don't know how you bridge that, but I'll tell you
Hmm.
for the user, that would be awesome. And especially with like this metaverse idea, um, I think it would be pretty cool because then you would actually have assets because these assets are worth real money today. Swords are
Hmm.
selling for like whatever they are, but I can see that becoming sort of its own asset class, which would be pretty cool.
Totally.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
All right, well we're gonna wrap it there. So next week I'm gonna let you guys pick the topic for next week because I've got millions of ideas. But for now,